Hey, hey, hey there. Today is a historic period. I guess every day is historic in some way, but we're in the middle of this impeachment proceeding against Donald Trump. It's the second day, and they have never allowed any witnesses or documentation into the trial. According to the Republicans, they voted, it went down in a straight party line vote that the Republicans said, we don't need any witnesses, we don't need any documents, we just don't want anything. We just want to get this over with, and we don't want to look at anything. And the Democrats, of course, are all saying, yes, we do. And it demonstrates something that is a very sad fact of our era, that the United States of America is coming to an end. And there's people say red states and blue states and purple states. And I've been watching this show on PBS, The Great Divide, which is about the divisions that exist right now in the United States of America that seem unfixable. There's just two groups or three groups or so who just don't see the United States of America in the same way. They have, for example, what's going on with the current president, Donald Trump. He is above the law. This is a new sort of a kingship, maybe something like a dictatorship. He can do whatever he wants. He said Article 2 of the Constitution lets me do anything I want, which means that he's above the law and that nobody can ever do anything to stop him. And there is some fear, and I don't know if it's legitimate because he's so old anyway, that if he does lose the next election, or if he goes on and wins the next election and then goes through another 4 years, a lot of people think that he's going to refuse to leave the leadership, the presidency. And that might actually happen because people on the right have given up on the Constitution. They've given up on lots of the institutions that have been established in the United States over the years. And Donald Trump's come right out and say this is what he calls draining the swamp, I suppose. The FBI, he doesn't like the FBI. The State Department, he doesn't like that. NATO, he doesn't like that. He doesn't like following what the Joint Chiefs of Staff have to say. He doesn't like any of this stuff. He doesn't like congressional oversight. He's opposed to that. And the Republicans, I guess, are right with him on all of these things. They're going to get rid of all these institutions. And the people on the left are freaking out, saying, oh my God, this is the things that we've built up over the years. And of course, there's a lot of differences about, how the division of wealth in the United States. Every time the Republicans get involved and get an opportunity, they cut taxes on wealthy people and they cut benefits on poorer people, etc. The workers' rights, they are opposed to that. They're opposed to anything that helps the working class. And now they're opposed to education. They think that a lot of you hear all the people on the right saying that universities are communists and so forth. Well, all right. The Great Divide does exist in the United States of America, and I don't want a civil war, really. And I've been trying to think of another way around breaking up the United States because we're coming to the end of the United States very soon, and anybody can see this, that it's USA is no longer a workable concept the way it is. And so what we need to do is, I believe, something akin to a franchise. And this could be international because, the biggest problem with dividing up a country is land, geography. That's the biggest problem. When they busted up Germany, when they busted up the Soviet Union, they couldn't decide where the land was. At the end of World War II, at the end of World War I, they did this in Yalta, and they did it in Versailles. A bunch of people sat down and drew lines, on the map saying this is this country and this is this country. And, it wasn't always a very good way of dividing things up. I mean, what's going on in the Middle East right now has a lot to do with what happened after World War II, when people like Winston Churchill and Stalin and it was Truman all sat down and drew these lines. They invented countries. Like Iraq was an invented country. And so that's how they. Well, what we're talking about here, rather than what I think we should do when we break up the United States of America, is have something like a franchise. A franchise is something. Now, this is kind of difficult, is still because of geographic problems. But if I'm in the blue franchise, let's say the liberal franchise, then I believe in paying a higher percentage of my pay as taxes. And if you're in the red franchise, you don't pay any taxes, let's say. There'd be no taxes for the red franchise and high taxes for the blue franchise. Contrary to that as well, in the blue franchise, or along with that, in the blue franchise, if you have children, then they would go to a school that is paid for by the government, like we have right now, as a matter of fact. And if you're in a red franchise, you can choose not to educate your children in a school. You could do homeschooling, or you could do whatever you want. There wouldn't be any law that said that you had to send your kid to any school. And if you did send them to a school, then you would send them to a private school that you paid for out of your pocket. But, you save money because you're not paying any taxes. Example B is, in the blue franchise, if you live in the city, there's public transportation, either inexpensive public transportation or free public transportation, but you're paying in taxes. Now here's the problems. I could draw a bunch of these lines. Social Security, we would have in the blue franchise, of course, Social Security, unemployment compensation, free health care, but you have to pay a higher tax. Now here's some of the problems that would arise. Companies that would have to pay taxes. Now, how would that be divided up? That's kind of complicated, because no company ever wants to pay any taxes, ever. They don't think, the only reason they pay taxes is kicking and screaming, and that's why they finance all these Republicans to get into Congress so that they don't have to pay taxes. But if you want to employ people in the blue franchise, you have to pay taxes. Otherwise, you're going to have no workforce, no educated workforce especially, and no workforce. So if you choose as a company to do business with anybody in the blue franchise, you're going to have to pay a percentage of taxes toward that. So that's how I would deal with that. It's kind of, there's a lot of details that have to be ironed out, of course. Let me look at the other way. Transportation is going to be a problem, because the federal highway system, well, there might be separate roads. I don't know. Like I said, these details have to be hammered out, but separate freeways for the blue franchise and the red franchise. The blue franchise, you would just get on the freeway and drive. Or we would have like public transportation going cross country, like high-speed trains that are paid for by the government. But if you're in the red franchise, you would pay a toll as you get on. That everything would cost, like, what about neighborhoods? Now that's a good one. I suppose it may come to the fact that eventually that there would be like separate neighborhoods for red franchise and blue franchise. How about things like guns? That's a toughie. The people in the red franchise would have no limits on weaponry, I suppose, which means they would end up going out and shooting all the people in the blue franchise. Maybe, I don't know, but this is one of the. But there would be no gun control. People in the blue franchise would have some sort of requirement to register their guns. And what about law enforcement? Well, in the red franchise, there'd be a lot less law enforcement because most things would be legal. They could have, you're allowed to beat your wife, for example, or you're allowed to, you know, you can go to the store with a gun, and if you rob a blue franchise, what about money? That's another one. There are a lot of details that have to be ironed out, but I also want to say that if this, when I'm not just talking to the United States eventually, what could happen in this is they could have an international red franchise and an international blue franchise. I know a lot of people hate the concept. Well, the red franchise can just stay in the United States. The blue franchise can be international if the red franchise is so much opposed to internationalism. Now, I know this is a complicated thing, but what is the alternative? A civil war, which I think is we're coming to eventually. I don't know how this civil war will come down. Let's talk about the military too. The both, well, I don't know. I don't know what would happen with the red franchise. They would have to have a military because they would have to stand up to those countries which don't want them to have their businesses raping and pillaging through the area. But the blue franchise will need less military because there is more compromise involved in the blue franchise. I don't know. These are complicated things, but I think with modern technology and artificial intelligence, these things can be done to a large extent. Like when you're going down the road in your car and you don't have you're not free to get on the freeway. Let's say you're a red franchise guy and you get on the blue franchise freeway without paying, then automatically your engine would shut off or something like that because it would be built into the car. You cannot drive, like that kind of stuff. If you go into you try to send your kid to the public schools, they would see that it wasn't his kid, and well, there's lots of situations like that. So I'm still working on this concept a little bit, but I think we're going to have to come to this eventually. The United States is not going to survive much longer.